Assalamu alaikum. Welcome back to the YouTube channel and joining me for today's exploration. Today, I will be talking about a paper I wrote a few months ago around Islam in the media, and I wanted to take some time to walk through it and understand some of the social dynamics at play around how we can be often brainwashed by the media as well. So, jumping right into the exploration, Hollywood films such as True Lies, Rules of Engagement, Delta Force, and The Siege portrayed Muslims through a familiar trope of the terrorist, despite all of these films being released before the 9/11 attacks. Since 9/11, however, the narrative has intensified, with media often framing Muslims as inherently violent or hostile. Now, as I mentioned earlier, by being able to draw on media psychology theories, including agenda setting, schema theory, and cultivation theory, what I wanted to explore was how news coverage, television, and film disproportionately associate Islamic identity with terrorism while offering more neutral portrayals of non Muslim perpetrators. A review of empirical studies reveals consistent patterns of stereotyping, biased framing, and overrepresentation of Muslim linked violence. The psychological and social consequences of these portrayals are also discussed, including increased Islamophobia, identity conflict among Muslim youth, and public policy shaped by fear based narratives. While acknowledging that some individuals distort Islamic teachings, what I wanted to argue about was that such actions do not reflect the core tenets of the religion. Instead, the media's role in selectively amplifying negative images contributes to widespread misunderstanding. In the end, I'll conclude by advocating for balanced media representation and improved media literacy to promote more nuanced and accurate perceptions of Islam in Muslim communities. So basically, the portrayal of Islam and Muslims in Western mass media, focusing on how Muslims in the Middle East are often linked to terrorism, despite Arabs only comprising about 20% of the global Muslim population. Most Muslims actually live in Africa and Southeast Asia. Hollywood and television have long used the terrorist narrative to evoke fear and drive storytelling, especially, as I mentioned earlier, post 9/11. So, media psychology concepts such as agenda setting, framing, schema theory, and cultivation theory explain how these portrayals shape perceptions. These cognitive processes, along with in group, out group dynamics, contribute to Islamophobia and policy decisions driven by fear. With the influence of social media and echo chambers, these stereotypes are amplified. So, some of the things I reviewed was Orientalism and in-group dynamics. So Edward Said's work from 1978, Orientalism introduced the idea that the West constructs the Orient as different and inferior. So unfortunately, this creates an us versus them binary in media representations. The war on terror, framed through this lens, casts Muslims as outsiders and threats. Agenda setting and framing is another issue. So, agenda setting doesn't tell viewers what to think, but what to think about. So, one of the papers I'd come across was from 2024 by De Costa. They explained that the media often overemphasizes Muslim violence and underreports similar acts by non Muslims. Latif, from his paper in 2024, suggests that the media discredits Islam by linking it disproportionately to terrorism and portraying it as a patriarchal and violent ideology. Now, there's empirical evidence too. So in 2025, Sponeholz and Muth analyzed over 262,000 articles across European media and found Muslims were frequently framed negatively and linked with violence. Non-Muslim perpetrators were often described as mentally ill or troubled. So again, using social psychology, they'll use priming terms like jihad and radical frames, where Muslim actions are often looked at religiously motivated, reinforcing fear and suspicion. Events like the Christchurch attack, however, from New Zealand, receive far less attention than similar Muslim linked attacks. So, now, how do you bring in cultivation theory and Islamophobia? Repeated exposure to such media creates a skewed view of reality. So, this cultivation leads to Islamophobia, where there's irrational fear or hostility towards Muslims and Islam. And then, as I referenced earlier, Latif also adds that social media intensifies this process by creating echo chambers, which is something I referred to earlier. Islamophobia is unfortunately now embedded in social and policy discourse in many Western countries, and we're seeing that quite common right now, especially in the media. So, how does schema theory and one-dimensional portrayals play into this? Schemas help people organize media messages. The common script is that Muslims wage a holy war against the West. Another author I came across with Nutzold from 2007 critiques the media's one-dimensional view, confusing cultural traditions like honor killings or female genitalia mutilation with Islamic teachings. Sharia law is often misunderstood, is portrayed in the media as barbaric and oppressive rather than as a complex ethical framework. And then there's the gender scripts and political rhetoric. In 2023, Van Hoest et al., their paper, described how gender equality is used to fuel anti-immigration rhetoric, especially in policies banning hijabs. So this paradoxically suppresses the very freedom Western societies claim to uphold. Muslim feminists argue that such bans inhibit religious and personal liberty. And then we've got media headlines and mental models. Major Western headlines in outlets activate implicit schemas that associate Muslims with threat and otherness. These schemas reinforce Islamophobia and influence both non-Muslim and Muslim readers alike. So there's obviously been a psychological impact on Muslim youth as well. So another paper I came across, Villarreal and Amin from 2024, found that negative portrayals cause emotional distress and identity conflict among Muslim youth in the West. Many feel pressure to hide their faith or cultural markers, so that could show up as names, even their clothing, to avoid discrimination, leading to fragmented identities. So to conclude all of this, more recently, we could talk about some TV shows like Homeland or the movie Zero Dark 30. The media's description or depiction of Muslims as villains reinforces some of the psychological or social psychological theories I talked about: agenda setting, schema theory, and cultivation. These portrayals also activate in-group bias, leading to widespread misunderstanding, fear, and discrimination. So news media continue to overemphasize Muslim-linked terrorism while ignoring or downplaying violence by non-Muslims. So this cultivates fear and legitimizes Islamophobic narratives, misrepresentations of Islamic teachings. You see that quite a bit, where people will often take the Quran out of context or even provide quotes from the Quran, which is often a misrepresentation or misinterpretation as well, but particularly regarding Sharia or gender roles as well. And they use that to justify exclusionary policies and social hostility. The psychological toll, unfortunately, on Muslim youth, especially in the West, is severe as they struggle with identity, belonging, and self-worth. As I mentioned earlier, some of the recommendations I would suggest around this is the media must include more Muslim voices, promote media literacy, and challenge existing scripts. Media education in schools can help youth identify and resist stereotypes. An inclusive media landscape is essential not only for public understanding, but also for the psychological well-being of Muslims worldwide. So thank you for joining me on this exploration. I will be linking the paper in the comments, and all the references, the research I did will also be available in there. So as always, if you like it, please subscribe to the channel and support us. Thank you.